The dawn of a saint, God's nurse, the story of Saint María de Jesús, Sacramentado Venegas. The September sun bathed the lands of Jalisco in that peculiar golden light of the Mexican highlands. It was September 8th, 1868, and in the modest homes of that region, where the mountains kissed the sky and the agave fields stretched as far as the eye could see, a child's cry announced the arrival of another soul into the world. No one could have imagined, in that simple and everyday moment, that this girl would become the first Mexican saint, a woman who would transform hospitals into temples of compassion and suffering into an altar of divine love. María Natividad Venegas de la Torre came into the world in turbulent times. 19th century Mexico was a nation in constant transformation, torn between its colonial past and an uncertain future. The wounds of the wars of independence had not yet fully healed, and new tensions were emerging on the horizon. The Catholic Church, a pillar of Mexican society for centuries, was beginning to face persecution and restrictions that would culminate in the following decades in one of the darkest periods of the country's religious history. But on that September day, within the humble walls of the house where Maria was born, there was only the quiet joy of a family welcoming another child. The air carried the scent of freshly made tortillas, the distant sound of church bells marking the canonical hours, and the silent promise that this child, like all others, would be raised in the ways of the Catholic faith that permeated every aspect of Mexican life. Jalisco, her homeland, was known for its fervent devotion. That region of central Mexico, with its colonial cities of white walls and terracotta roofs, its Baroque churches filled with gold and saints, and its religious traditions rooted for generations, would profoundly shape little Maria's soul. There, faith was not just a Sunday practice, but the very fabric of daily existence. Every gesture, every word, every decision was intertwined with the invisible but palpable presence of the divine. The Venegas de la Torre family was not wealthy, but they possessed that serene dignity of good families who, despite material difficulties, kept their values and their faith intact. The house, simple but clean, had its walls adorned with sacred images, and the rosary was prayed daily at dusk when the day's work ceased and the family gathered to give thanks for the blessings received and to ask for protection for the following day. Maria grew up breathing this air of natural piety, a religiosity that was not imposed but lived, not theory but daily experience. From a very young age, while other children played only with dolls and games, Maria showed a different inclination. Her large, dark eyes observed the world with a peculiar intensity, as if seeing beyond appearances, as if capturing dimensions of reality invisible to others. But destiny, with its mysterious hand, had plans that would turn that peaceful childhood into a crucible of trials. Death would come early into Maria's life, bringing with it the sharp pain of loss, but also, as so often happens in the divine plan, the seed of a compassion that would flourish in extraordinary proportions. Premature orphanhood, instead of hardening her heart, would make it infinitely more sensitive to the suffering of others. Losing her parents in childhood, Maria experienced that piercing emptiness that only those who have gone through similar losses can truly understand. There was no longer the protective embrace of her father, nor the gentle affection of her mother. The nights became darker, the days heavier, but it was precisely in this darkness that the light of faith began to shine with special intensity. While other orphan children might have rebelled against God, questioning why he had allowed such suffering, Maria took the opposite path. She drew even closer to him, finding in the Heavenly Father the comfort her earthly parents could no longer offer. This early experience of suffering was the school where Maria learned her first lessons in empathy. She knew what pain was. She was intimately acquainted with loneliness. She understood the weight of absence. And this visceral understanding of human suffering would be the foundation of her entire future life of service to the sick and needy. It would not be a distant charity, done from a position of superiority, but an authentic compassion from one who had suffered and could genuinely understand the suffering of others. Maria's childhood and adolescent years were marked by this tension between the pain of loss and the strength of faith. She grew up observing the world around her with eyes that had already wept, yet still maintained an unshakable hope. She saw the poor in their misery, the sick in their beds of suffering, the marginalized in their loneliness, and in each of them she recognized something of her own experience. They were not strangers to her, but brothers and sisters in humanity, companions on the great journey of existence marked by fragility and the need for love. Late 19th century Mexican society was undergoing profound transformations. The reform laws had secularized many aspects of public life, restricting the role of the church. Convents were closed, ecclesiastical properties confiscated, and a climate of growing tension was established between civil authorities and religious institutions. But for people like Maria, these political changes did not alter the essence of their faith. Religion for her was not a matter of institutional power, but an intimate and transformative experience that no law could extinguish. It was in this context of personal difficulties and social turmoil that Maria began to feel, while still very young, the call that would change the course of her life. It was not a thundering voice from heaven, nor a miraculous apparition. It was rather a persistent whisper in her heart, a growing certainty that her life should be dedicated to something greater than herself, a gradual but unshakable conviction that God was calling her to a special service. The Mexico that surrounded her was a country of stark contrasts. There was the sublime beauty of its landscapes, the richness of its traditions, the depth of its popular faith. But there was also devastating poverty, disease that claimed lives without mercy, and social injustice that kept millions in conditions of misery. And Maria, with her heart shaped by suffering and illuminated by faith, felt called to be right there, in the midst of this tension between beauty and pain, between hope and despair, offering to those who suffered not only physical care, but the living testimony of a love that transcends circumstances. The years following her orphanhood were times of silent formation. Maria, now a young woman of fragile appearance but surprisingly strong spirit, sought to understand what God wanted from her. She participated fervently in the life of the church, attending Mass daily whenever possible, spending hours in prayer before the Blessed Sacrament, and dedicating herself to the charitable works her small community organized. There was something special in the way Maria related to the Eucharist. For many Catholics of the time, communion was an important but occasional sacrament, surrounded by a reverential fear that often prevented a more frequent approach. Maria, however, developed a relationship of deep intimacy with Christ, present in the consecrated bread. She saw in the Eucharist not just a symbol or a memorial, but the real and living presence of Jesus, who made himself food and constant company. This Eucharistic devotion would be the backbone of all her spirituality and the source of her strength in the difficult years to come. In 1898, at the age of 30, Maria took the decisive step that would definitively mark her path. She joined the Association of the Daughters of Mary, a group of devout women dedicated to works of piety and charity. It was through this association that Maria had her first systematic contact with the care of the sick. In her city, there was a small makeshift hospital, more of a precarious infirmary than a true health center, where the poor and sick who could not afford private medical treatment sought some relief for their ailments. Maria began to frequent that humble place with increasing regularity. Initially, she helped with the simplest tasks: cleaning, preparing food, keeping the sick company during the long hours of loneliness. But it soon became clear that she possessed a special gift for that work. It was not just her practical competence, although that was notable. It was something deeper, more intangible. There was a peace in her presence that comforted, a balm in her words that relieved pains beyond the physical, a tenderness in her gestures that restored dignity to those whom illness had reduced to a state of total dependence. The sick noticed the difference. When Maria entered a room, something changed in the atmosphere. The air of despair and abandonment that so often prevailed in those narrow, poorly ventilated corridors seemed to dissipate. The moans of pain did not cease completely, but they were now accompanied by a renewed hope. The dying, who faced death in loneliness and terror, found in Maria a companion who reconciled them with the final moment, helping them to see beyond the apparent end. But Maria was not content to be just another dedicated volunteer. She began to dream of something bigger, something that could give permanent and professional structure to that spontaneous service. She saw the limitations of the small, makeshift hospital, understood that occasional charity, however well-intentioned, was not enough. The sick needed constant, specialized care, driven not just by goodwill, but by a total and permanent dedication. It was then that the idea that would transform her life and the lives of countless others was born in her heart, to found a religious congregation specifically dedicated to the care of the sick and Eucharistic adoration. The two dimensions, service and contemplation, were inseparable in her spiritual vision. The care of the sick would not be just an external activity, a charitable task, but an extension of union with Christ in the Eucharist. Each patient would be recognized as the living presence of the suffering Jesus, and each act of care would be practical adoration. Maria was not alone in this dream. Other women, touched by the same vision and moved by the same love, joined her. Together, facing bureaucratic obstacles, social resistance, and material difficulties, they founded the Congregation of the Daughters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus and of the Holy Eucharist. The chosen name said it all. It would be a community centered on the heart of Christ and the Eucharist, dedicated to manifesting this divine love through concrete care for the suffering. Upon professing her religious vows, Maria took a new name, as was the custom in religious tradition. She chose to call herself María de Jesús Sacramentado, Mary of Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. It was not a casual or merely devotional choice. It was a declaration of identity, a definition of mission. She now belonged completely to Jesus, present in the Eucharist, and her life would be a living sacrament of that love that gives itself completely, that becomes broken bread to feed human hunger in all its dimensions. The first years of the congregation were marked by immense difficulties. Everything was lacking: material resources, adequate facilities, official recognition. But Mother Maria, as she came to be called, faced every obstacle with a serenity that was impressive. Her trust in God was not passivity or naivety. She worked tirelessly, administered wisely, planned prudently. But beneath all practical action was that unshakable certainty that if the work was of God, He would provide the necessary means. And He did. Gradually, the congregation grew. More women joined, moved by the example and leadership of Mother Maria. New hospitals and nursing homes were opened. The quality of the care offered began to be recognized not only by the poor, who were its main beneficiaries, but also by doctors and health authorities who observed with respect that silent but extraordinarily effective work. Mother Maria developed a leadership style that combined firmness and tenderness. She was demanding of herself and her sisters, but always with that understanding that came from her own experience of suffering. She asked nothing of others that she herself was not willing to do. On the contrary, she reserved for herself the most difficult tasks, the most desperate cases, the most abandoned patients. There was a profoundly mystical dimension to Mother Maria's spirituality. Her long hours of prayer before the Blessed Sacrament were not an escape from the world, but a source of strength to delve deeper into it. There in the silence of the chapel, before the monstrance that held the consecrated host, she found the spiritual energy needed to face the long shifts at the hospital, the courage not to be discouraged by apparently hopeless cases, the patience to deal with difficult patients and impossible situations. But Mexico was preparing to plunge into one of the most turbulent periods of its history. The Mexican Revolution, which began in 1910, would bring with it not only political and social changes, but also a dramatic intensification of religious persecution. What began as a movement for agrarian reform and social justice soon transformed into a complex conflict where different factions fought for power and where the Catholic Church often found itself in the crossfire. Mother María de Jesús Sacramentado was over 40 years old when the revolution broke out. She was no longer the fragile young woman of the early days, but a mature, experienced woman with an established network of hospitals and nursing homes under her responsibility. And suddenly, everything she had built with so much effort was threatened. The anti-clerical laws became increasingly severe. Priests were expelled, churches closed, public manifestations of faith prohibited. Wearing a religious habit in public became a crime. Religious congregations were officially dissolved. The revolutionary government saw the church as an ally of the old regime, an obstacle to progress, an institution that needed to be neutralized or eliminated. For many religious, this was a time of terror and surrender. Some fled into exile, others abandoned religious life, and still others went into hiding, hoping the storm would pass. Mother Maria chose a different path: to remain, to resist peacefully, to continue serving despite everything. Her logic was simple but profound. The sick did not stop being sick because a revolution was underway. The poor did not stop being poor because new laws had been passed. Human suffering continued, perhaps even intensified by the chaos of civil war. How could she abandon her post precisely when she was most needed? So Mother Maria made a decision that many considered reckless, but which revealed the essence of her faith. She would keep the hospitals open. She would care for everyone who arrived, whether they were federal soldiers or revolutionaries, fervent Catholics or staunch anti-clericals, friends or enemies. The hospital would not be the territory of one faction or another, but God's territory, a sacred space where the only law that would prevail would be the law of love and compassion. This position brought her problems from all sides. Revolutionary authorities suspected she was hiding persecuted priests or supporting the Catholic resistance. More radical Catholics criticized her for treating soldiers who had desecrated churches and persecuted the faithful. Mother Maria listened to the criticism, understood the fears and resentments on both sides, but did not change her position. For her, every wounded or sick human being was the suffering Christ, regardless of their political or religious affiliation. There were moments of extreme danger. Several times, armed groups invaded the hospitals looking for enemies. Mother Maria received them with that impressive serenity that had become her trademark. She was not intimidated, she did not bow, but she also did not confront with violence. She simply stated in a firm but anger-free voice, "This is a hospital. Only the sick or those who come to care for them enter here. If you are wounded, we will be happy to treat you. If you come for another reason, I ask you to respect this sacred space." Something in her presence, in that unlikely combination of physical fragility and spiritual strength, often disarmed even the most hardened. Soldiers who entered ready to loot or arrest would leave bewildered, some even apologizing. There were testimonies from revolutionary officers who, after encounters with Mother Maria, ordered that her hospitals be protected and left in peace. But things did not always end peacefully. There were moments of real violence and danger. The hospital was disputed territory, and Mother Maria had to use all her cunning and courage to protect not only her sisters and the patients, but also the persecuted priests who often sought refuge there. She developed ingenious systems to hide priests, allowing them to continue celebrating Mass secretly and administering sacraments to the dying, despite the mortal danger this represented for everyone involved. In those dark years, Mother Maria's faith was tested in unimaginable ways. She saw around her the collapse of the ecclesiastical structures she had known since childhood. Magnificent temples turned into stables or warehouses, sacred images destroyed, priests shot by firing squads, the faithful persecuted just for attending clandestine masses. The Catholic Mexico she had known was being systematically demolished. But instead of despair, she found an even deeper faith. Her faith had never depended on external structures, however important they were. It was rooted in that personal encounter with Christ in the Eucharist, in that mystical experience that no law could prohibit, no persecution could extinguish. Even when public masses were impossible, she continued her silent adoration, her spiritual communion, her total surrender. And something extraordinary happened. In the midst of the chaos and violence, the hospitals she ran became oases of peace. People of all political and religious convictions testified that there was something different about those places. It was not just the medical competence, although that was real. It was an intangible but palpable atmosphere of love, a sense that there, in those simple corridors, something sacred was happening. As the years went by, extraordinary stories about Mother Maria began to circulate. Some were simple testimonies of her exceptional kindness. Others went further, entering the realm of the miraculous. The line between heroic charity and a miracle proper seemed, in her case, particularly thin. There was the account of the multiplication of food. On days of extreme scarcity, when the hospital pantry was empty and dozens of patients and sisters needed to be fed, witnesses claimed that Mother Maria would retreat in prayer and mysteriously, enough food would appear for everyone. Some said she simply trusted in God, and He provided through unexpected donations. Others, however, testified to have seen with their own eyes small quantities of food that were enough to feed many more than was logically possible. Then there were the reports of inexplicable healings. Patients given up on by doctors who received the last rites in preparation for death and who suddenly, after Mother Maria's prayers, experienced sudden and complete recoveries. The doctors would shake their heads, unable to explain. They spoke of spontaneous remissions, misdiagnoses, remarkable coincidences. But for those who were present, for the families of the sick, for the healed themselves, there was no doubt. Something supernatural had happened. One of the most talked about cases involved a young mother with puerperal fever, a postpartum infection that at the time was practically a death sentence. The woman was burning with fever, delirious, unconscious, while her newborn baby cried in the crib beside her. The doctors had given up. It was only a matter of hours, or at most, days. Mother Maria knelt beside the bed, took the dying woman's hand, and began to pray. Witnesses reported that she stayed there without moving for hours. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, the woman opened her eyes, the fever had disappeared, and she asked to see her child. The doctors who examined her the next morning found no sign of the infection that should have killed her. There were also testimonies about her ability to be in two places at once, a phenomenon known as bilocation in Catholic mystical tradition. One sister swore to have seen Mother Maria in the chapel in Eucharistic adoration. At the same time, another saw her attending to a patient in a distant wing of the hospital. Detailed conversations were recorded, impossible to have been hallucinations or cases of mistaken identity, but perhaps the most constant and verifiable miracle was what happened in Mother Maria's presence. People who entered in despair, consumed by physical pain or spiritual anguish, reported an inexplicable peace when they talked with her. It wasn't just her words, although those were wise and comforting. It was something in her presence, a kind of spiritual radiance that transformed environments and people. Doctors and nurses who worked alongside her, many of them skeptical about religious matters, testified that Mother Maria seemed to have an intuitive knowledge of the patient's conditions. She knew, without being told, when a patient was getting worse and needed urgent attention. She sensed crises before the symptoms manifested. Some saw her as simply very experienced and observant. Others suspected something more. There was the case of the boy with meningitis. The parents had lost all hope when the doctors explained that even if the boy survived, he would be left blind and deaf, possibly with severe brain damage. Mother Maria was informed of the case and began to visit the child daily, praying by his side, making the sign of the cross on his forehead with holy water. Surprisingly, the boy not only survived, but recovered completely, without any lasting effects. The doctors had no explanation. The parents had no doubt about what had happened. What made these accounts even more impressive was Mother Maria's own attitude towards them. She never boasted, never sought credit, always deflected attention from herself. When they spoke to her of miracles, she would simply reply, "It was God. I only prayed. He is the one who heals." This genuine humility, this total absence of seeking recognition, gave even more credibility to the testimonies. But for Mother Maria, the true miracle was not in the spectacular cures or the extraordinary phenomena. It was in the silent transformation that happened in every heart touched by compassion, in every life restored not only physically but spiritually, in every person who, through the care received at the hospital, rediscovered human dignity and the loving presence of God. She saw Christ in every patient. It was not a metaphor for her, but a living reality. That beggar covered in sores was Jesus. That syphilitic prostitute whom everyone avoided was Jesus. That wounded soldier who had desecrated churches was Jesus. And if it was Jesus, then every act of care was adoration. Every word of comfort was prayer. Every treated wound was kissing the wounds of the crucified one. The 1950s found Mother Maria already elderly. Decades of tireless work, of sleepless nights beside the dying, of fasts so that others might have food, had taken their physical toll. Her body, always frail, was now visibly worn. She walked with difficulty. Her once firm voice had become weaker, her movements slower. But her spirit remained intact, her faith unshakable, her love for the sick as intense as in the early days. She continued to make her rounds through the hospitals, visiting each patient, offering a word of comfort here, a gesture of affection there. The younger sisters begged her to rest, but she would reply with a smile, "There will be time to rest in eternity. As long as God gives me strength, I will continue to serve." Mother Maria herself began to need the care she had offered to so many others. Her health gradually deteriorated. Chronic illnesses, aggravated by years of voluntary deprivations, began to manifest more seriously. But she faced her own suffering with the same serenity with which she had helped countless others face theirs. There was a particularly touching episode in her final months. A young sister, new to the congregation, was assigned to care for Mother Maria during a phase of particular weakness. The young woman was nervous, intimidated by the responsibility of caring for the foundress, the woman everyone considered a saint. Mother Maria sensed the tension and, with that gentle humor that characterized her even in difficult moments, said, "My child, taking care of me must be the easiest thing you've ever done. I am the most obedient patient you will ever have." And it was true. She accepted every medication, every treatment, every restriction with gratitude and without complaint. But even when she was ill, Mother Maria continued to be a source of inspiration and wisdom. Sisters from all over the congregation came to visit her, seeking advice, sharing difficulties, asking for prayers. She received them all with joy, listened attentively, and advised wisely. Her room was transformed into a kind of living sanctuary where the presence of the sacred was palpable. As the end drew near, Mother Maria began to speak more openly about death. Not with fear or sadness, but with the joyful expectation of one who is about to meet the beloved she had sought her entire life. She told the sisters, "All my life I have wanted to be close to Jesus in the Eucharist. Soon I will be with him face to face, without veils, without intermediaries. How can I not rejoice?" The last days of July 1959 were marked by a sudden worsening of her condition. Mother Maria remained conscious, lucid, but it was clear that the end was near. The sisters took turns by her side, praying the rosary, singing soft hymns, keeping that vigil of love that she herself had kept so many times beside the dying. On July 30th, on a sunny Thursday morning, Mother María de Jesús Sacramentado gave her spirit to God. She was 90 years old and had dedicated more than 6 decades to the service of the sick. She died as she had lived, in peace, confident, completely surrendered to the divine will. The news of her death spread quickly. People from all social classes, of all convictions, came to pay their last respects. There were the poor she had cared for, doctors who had worked alongside her, politicians who had learned to respect her despite ideological differences, and countless people who had been touched, directly or indirectly, by her extraordinary life. During the wake, witnesses reported a sweet fragrance emanating from the body, impossible to identify, but indescribable in its beauty. Others spoke of an expression of absolute peace on her face, as if she had seen something wonderful at the moment of death, and that vision had been imprinted on her features. The funeral was an extraordinary event. Thousands of people accompanied the procession, many crying, others praying aloud, some singing hymns. It was as if the entire community, recognizing the holiness of that life, paid one last tribute to one who had given everything for others. But the story of Mother María de Jesús Sacramentado did not end with her death. In fact, in many ways, it had just begun. Almost immediately after her passing, people began to report favors received through her intercession. Sick people who prayed for her help experienced unexpected cures. People in desperate situations found solutions after invoking her. Her memory became a source of comfort and hope for thousands. One of the cases that most caught the attention of ecclesiastical authorities involved a woman with terminal cancer. The doctors had given her only weeks to live. The family, desperate, began a novena, asking for Mother Maria's intercession. On the 9th day, against all medical expectations, tests showed that the tumor had simply disappeared. The doctors had no explanation. The woman, who would live for many more years in complete health, never had any doubts about what had happened. Mother Maria's reputation for holiness grew exponentially in the decades following her death. Her congregation continued to expand, opening hospitals and nursing homes throughout Mexico and beyond. Each new house carried with it the spirit of the foundress, that unique combination of professional competence and Christian compassion, of practical efficiency and mystical depth. The Catholic Church, in its prudent wisdom, began the formal process of investigating her life and virtues. Witnesses were heard, documents examined, miracles investigated with scientific and theological rigor. The canonization process is long and meticulous, designed to distinguish authentic holiness from mere popularity or emotionalism. But in Mother Maria's case, the evidence was overwhelming. Her life of heroic charity was widely documented. Witnesses from all walks of life confirmed her exceptional character. The miracles attributed to her intercession passed the most rigorous medical and theological scrutinies. In 2000, in a majestic ceremony at St. Peter's Basilica, Pope John Paul II proclaimed María de Jesús Sacramentado Venegas a saint. The little orphan from Jalisco, the tireless nurse, the woman who had transformed hospitals into temples of love, was now officially recognized by the Universal Church as a model of holiness and a powerful intercessor before God. The significance of this moment transcended individual recognition. Saint María de Jesús Sacramentado became the first Mexican-born female saint to be canonized. For a country that had suffered intense religious persecution, that had seen its faith tested in terrible ways, having one of its daughters recognized as a saint was a source of immense joy and pride. It was the confirmation that the Mexican faith, so deep and authentic, had produced fruits of holiness recognized universally. Today, decades after her canonization, Saint María de Jesús Sacramentado remains a living presence in the Church. Her image is in hospitals, clinics, and nursing homes all over the world. Doctors and nurses invoke her as their patron. The sick pray for her intercession. Her relics are venerated by devotees who testify to graces received. But her legacy goes beyond the devotional. She remains an inspiring model of how the Christian faith should be expressed concretely in service to those who suffer. At a time when religion is often seen as something abstract or individualistic, Saint Maria shows that authentic spirituality necessarily translates into practical compassion, into concrete care, into love that becomes gesture and presence. The institutions she founded continue to grow and adapt to new times. Modern hospitals, equipped with state-of-the-art technology, but maintaining that original spirit of seeing Christ in every patient. Training programs for health professionals that integrate technical competence and humanistic values. Hospice care homes where people can die with dignity, surrounded by love and spiritual care. Her life continues to speak especially to healthcare professionals. In a world where medicine sometimes becomes excessively technical, where patients can be reduced to diagnoses and numbers, Saint Maria reminds us that each person is a universe of dignity. Each suffering is sacred. Each moment of care is an opportunity to manifest God's love. For the sick, she offers hope not only of physical healing, but of meaning in suffering. Her life testifies that suffering, although always an evil to be alleviated when possible, can become a path of sanctification, an opportunity for union with the crucified Christ, an occasion for spiritual growth. The story of Saint María de Jesús Sacramentado Venegas is one of those narratives that challenge the modern tendency towards cynicism and disbelief. It is difficult to maintain a skeptical stance in the face of a life so consistently dedicated to the good, so radically given to others, so deeply rooted in faith. She lived in difficult times, went through periods of persecution and war, faced material poverty and social opposition. She would have had 1,000 reasons to give up, to seek a more comfortable life, to protect herself from dangers. But she chose the opposite path, to dedicate herself completely to the service of the most vulnerable, to remain faithful in the midst of the storm, to turn every obstacle into an opportunity to witness God's love. Her spirituality, centered on the Eucharist and expressed in the care of the sick, offers a model of integration between contemplation and action that is especially relevant in the contemporary world. She did not separate prayer from service, did not see a contradiction between mystical life and practical work. On the contrary, each dimension fed and intensified the other. What is most impressive about her journey is its consistency. She was not a saint in isolated moments of heroism, but in a daily fidelity, sustained over decades, expressed in the small gestures repeated day after day. She was a saint in the routine, in the patient care of the difficult patient, in the kind word to the patient with no family, in the night vigil beside the anonymous dying person. Saint María de Jesús Sacramentado reminds us that holiness is not something reserved for extraordinary people in exceptional circumstances. It is rather the generous response to God's call that each person receives, lived in the concrete circumstances of one's own life. She did not choose the era in which she lived, did not determine the difficulties she would face, but she chose how she would respond to it all. And her answer was always love. For those who suffer, her life offers companionship and hope. She knew suffering from an early age, through orphanhood, poverty, the trials of religious life in times of persecution. She was no stranger to pain, but she learned to transform it, to find meaning in it, to offer it united to the redemptive suffering of Christ. And she showed that it is possible not only to endure suffering, but to transfigure it into an occasion for love. For healthcare professionals, she remains an inspiring patron. She reminds them that medicine and nursing are not just technical professions, but vocations to the service of life and human dignity. That each patient is a person with a history, hopes, fears, and dreams, not just a clinical case. The true care integrates body, mind, and spirit. For the Church, Saint Maria is a testimony to the perennial fruitfulness of the Catholic faith. Even in times of brutal persecution, even when external structures were destroyed, the faith continued to generate saints, producing fruits of heroic charity, transforming lives and societies. It is the confirmation that Christ's promise, "The gates of hell shall not prevail," is not just theory, but a verifiable historical reality. And for all of us, regardless of faith or particular convictions, her life offers a shining example of what it means to live with purpose, to dedicate oneself to something greater than oneself, to make a real difference in the world. In a time often marked by individualism, consumerism, and the pursuit of immediate gratification, Saint Maria shows that there is a deeper happiness in giving, a more authentic fulfillment in service, a greater plenitude in the love that forgets itself to care for the other. Her memory continues to inspire religious vocations, calling men and women to dedicate their lives completely to God in the service of their brothers and sisters. It continues to motivate lay people to see their daily work, especially in the areas of health and care, as true missions, as concrete ways of expressing God's love in the world. The miracles that continue to be attributed to her intercession testify that she remains active with God, interceding for those who invoke her with faith. Each inexplicable cure, each mysteriously resolved situation, each grace received after praying for her help, is a whisper from the divine saying, "I am here, I care, I love you." Saint María de Jesús Sacramentado Venegas transformed the hospitals she ran into cathedrals of compassion. She made each sickbed an altar where the sacrament of divine love was celebrated. She saw in each suffering face the face of Christ and responded with the tenderness of one who recognizes the beloved. Her life teaches us that there is no suffering so great that love cannot reach it, no person so abandoned that they do not deserve care and dignity, no situation so desperate that it cannot be touched by hope. She lived this truth until her last breath, and now, from heavenly glory, she continues to inspire all who dedicate themselves to the noble work of caring for the sick and suffering. God's nurse, the first Mexican female saint, the woman who transformed suffering into an altar of love, Saint María de Jesús Sacramentado Venegas, remains among us as a guiding light, an inspiring example, a consoling intercessor. Her story is not just an account of the past, but a present invitation for each of us in our own time and circumstances to find ways to love as she loved, to serve as she served, to live as she lived, completely given, entirely dedicated, profoundly united to the heart of Jesus that beats with love for humanity. May her memory be eternally blessed, and may her intercession continue to bring healing, hope, and love to all who suffer. Prayer. O Saint María de Jesús, Sacramentado Venegas, Nurse of God and first Mexican female saint, who dedicated your entire life to the care of the sick and suffering, seeing in each of them the face of the crucified Christ, intercede for me before the throne of the Most High. You who found in the Eucharist the strength to serve with tireless love, teach me to love as you loved, to serve as you served, and to trust in God even in the most difficult trials. Obtain for me the grace that I ask of you today with faith. Make your request here. But above all, obtain for me a compassionate heart like yours, that knows how to recognize Christ in every suffering brother and sister. You who remained faithful during persecutions, strengthen my faith in the storms of life. You who transformed hospitals into temples of divine love, help me to make my life an altar of charity. O dear Saint Maria, patroness of the sick and of all healthcare professionals, protect the doctors, nurses and caregivers, so that they may see in each patient their sacred human dignity. Console those who suffer, give hope to the hopeless, peace to the dying, and strength to all who bear the burden of illness. Through your powerful intercession, may I experience the infinite mercy of God and one day contemplate with you the face of the beloved you sought your whole life. Amen. Saint María de Jesús, Sacramentado Venegas, pray for us. My prayer, loving Father, with a humble and grateful heart, we place ourselves in your presence to thank you for the call to be sowers of your word through the lives of your saints. We thank you for this channel, which you have allowed to become a bridge of faith, connecting hearts to your infinite mercy in a world that so desperately seeks a refuge. May each sacred biography we share be a balm for weary souls and a mirror of the virtues that draw us closer to you. May the testimony of your servants inspire each listener to seek a life of greater holiness, courage, and love for their neighbor. We acknowledge that we do nothing on our own. You are the source of all inspiration and the strength behind every word. We thank you for using us as your simple instruments to narrate the wonders you have worked in the lives of those who loved you above all else. May this work continue to strengthen the communion among us, transforming this digital space into a true spiritual family, united by the same love for Christ and the desire to follow in his footsteps. We consecrate to you, Lord, our voices, minds, and hearts. May everything we do here serve for your greater honor and glory and for the salvation of souls. May your blessing descend upon all who follow and support this work today and always. In the name of Jesus Christ, your Son and our Lord. Amen. The story of Saint María de Jesús Sacramentado Venegas leaves us with a powerful lesson that transcends time and borders. This extraordinary woman, born an orphan of destiny but rich in faith, who grew up in poverty but overflowed with love, who lived through times of persecution but never abandoned her mission, teaches us that true greatness lies not in what we receive from life, but in what we do with what we are given. She could have rebelled against God when she lost her parents as a child. She could have sought a comfortable and secure life when opportunities arose. She could have fled or hidden when religious persecution threatened everything she had built. But Saint María de Jesús Sacramentado chose a different path, the path of unconditional love, selfless service, and unshakable faith. In every patient she cared for, she saw not just a sick body, but a precious soul, a living temple of the Holy Spirit, the suffering Christ himself waiting for compassion. Her hands not only healed physical wounds, but touched hearts, restored dignity, and gave hope back to the desperate. Her smile was a balm for pain. Her presence was peace in the midst of chaos. Her faith was a beacon in the darkness. The first Mexican female saint shows us that holiness is not something distant, reserved for a select few in remote times. Holiness is responding yes to God every day, in the small daily choices, in the simple gestures of kindness, in the silent fidelity when no one is looking. It is choosing to love when it would be easier to walk away, to serve when it would be more convenient to rest, to forgive when hurt calls for revenge, to persist when everything invites you to give up. How many of us face difficulties and immediately ask, why me? Saint Maria faced orphanhood, poverty, persecution, illnesses and mortal dangers. But she never asked this question with bitterness. Instead, she asked, "For what purpose, Lord?" Transforming every trial into an opportunity for growth, every challenge into a springboard for greater love. Her devotion to the Eucharist was not an escape from reality, but a source of strength to dive deeper into it. She did not separate prayer from action, contemplation from service, love of God from love of neighbor. For her, it was all one movement, the movement of love that descends from God, fills the human heart, and overflows to our brothers and sisters in need. The miracles that happened in her life and continue to happen through her intercession are signs that God has not abandoned this world, that heaven is not distant or indifferent to human suffering. Every inexplicable cure, every grace received, every transformed life is a whisper from the divine saying, "I am here, I care, I love you." Today, in the 21st century, when so many hospitals have become cold and impersonal places, when so many healthcare professionals are exhausted and disillusioned, when so many sick people feel like just numbers in statistics, Saint María de Jesús Sacramentado invites us to recover the sacred in the care of life. She reminds us that medicine without compassion is empty technique, that science without love is sterile knowledge, that caring for the body without touching the soul is healing only halfway. Her life is an urgent invitation for each of us, wherever we are, with the gifts we have, to make a difference. We don't need to found congregations or open hospitals to follow her example. We can live her legacy by visiting a sick relative, offering a kind word to a suffering stranger, donating time to causes that alleviate others' pain, treating every person who crosses our path with dignity. God's nurse teaches us that there are no insignificant people or worthless lives. Every human being, from the most powerful to the most marginalized, from the holiest to the most sinful, bears the image of God and deserves to be treated with reverence. When we care for the least of these, we care for Christ himself. This is not poetry, it is lived theology. It is the gospel made flesh. If you subscribe to the Sacred Stories channel, you will be connecting with narratives that transform, that inspire, that lift the soul. Each video is a window into holiness, an encounter with extraordinary people who lived ordinary lives in extraordinary ways. Leave a like if this story touched your heart. This simple gesture helps other people discover these pearls of faith and courage. Share this video with someone who needs hope, with someone who is facing difficulties, with someone who cares for the sick or who is sick themselves. Now, a question for you to reflect on and share in the comments. In your life, who was that person who cared for you with a love similar to that of Saint María de Jesús Sacramentado? Or perhaps you are that person for someone. How have you shown compassion to those who suffer around you? Before you go, be sure to watch one of the videos that appear up here, chosen especially for you. Each saint's story is a door that opens to heaven, a path of light in the midst of the shadows of this world. Allow these holy lives to continue inspiring your journey. May Saint María de Jesús Sacramentado Venegas intercede for all of us, for the sick who suffer, for the healthcare professionals who dedicate themselves, and for every person who seeks to live love in a concrete and transformative way. May her light continue to shine, illuminating our paths, reminding us that love is the only force capable of overcoming all darkness. Until the next sacred story.